Okay. As an organization, what's the change that you expect to see in individuals, in families, in community groups, in the locality, in your neighborhood? What is the change and how do you measure that change? And is that actually what your partners are looking for, what your stakeholders are looking for as well? And how do you clearly explain that change? That's basically it. How do you justify the existence of your organization? You can do it through all sorts of persuasive means, but unless you can show the evidence of the change that you're affecting, it's hot air, I guess. So I guess cyclical improvement, that's something that is built into all maturity models anyway. You cyclically review what you're doing to ensure that it is efficient, not only efficient, but effective, not only effective, but deals with the small things that in any organization can creep in, which then cause bigger problems down the line. And root cause analysis helps you to do that because then you see how it affected initially, and then you work towards constantly evaluating what you're doing. Get a group together to ask them whether they thought those KPIs were relevant to the work that they were actually doing. Because sometimes we measure things that were great 2 years ago and we keep measuring them, but actually the business has moved on, but we're still measuring the old things. And sometimes the employees have a better idea as to what they should be measuring than the people who set the KPIs, who probably left and gone on to other jobs. Let's face it. So I think they have a place, but they need to be regularly reviewed with the people who are actually doing the work at the front end.
Welcome to the Fractional Frontier, where we explore the future of leadership in today's evolving business landscape. I'm Charles McLachlan, here with Lorraine Carter, and every week we dive deep into the world of high-performing fractional executives and the businesses that leverage them.
Whether you're an experienced fractional leader or a business decision maker seeking top-tier talent, this is the place for actionable insights, strategies, and stories from the front lines of fractional leadership.
Today, we're delighted to welcome our guest, David Simmons, who's going to share insights about impact evaluation and fractional leadership. Welcome, David.
Oh,
great to see you, David. So can you briefly tell us about your career that led you into evaluating impact and what sparked your transition into fractional work?
Okay, well, I started off my career as an actor, actually, many, many years ago, which enabled me to learn how to survive in a world that is precarious, to say the very least. That gives you an insight into the kind of mindset that you have to be a fractional leader, because actors are, in a sense, fractional people and may not be leaders.
Mm.
And so you go from job to job and you do spend quite a lot of time out of work as an actor. And through my life, I sort of graduated into the IT world, and that gave me some insight into the importance of data and how much I enjoyed data. I didn't realize how much I did until I started playing with spreadsheets. And that's an important grounding for me because that's some of the foundations of what I do, working with numbers and working with figures and that sort of thing. And I realized I was working with a charity, fast forward quite a few years, and we were doing a parenting program, and I love doing training programs. It's one of many things that I do. And I was doing it with my wife and a colleague for this charity, and we were training people who are reluctant parents whose children were not going to school. Yeah, and it was a sort of 8-week program that we'd written ourselves, and we knew it was good, but how do we prove that it's good? And we were very fortunate to have a London Borough who were very keen to fund us. But I was very keen at the same time to prove its effectiveness, and I didn't know how to do that. Now, my CEO at the time, very enterprising woman named Avril McIntyre, a local business leader and a charitable entrepreneur, she basically said, what you need is to partner up with the university. And so she had friends in the University of Greenwich. And through that, I ended up doing a PhD. I was starting with a master's and I got carried away. And I started to really enjoy the whole work around evaluation. And it started off as an evaluative piece of work and then gradually grew into this enormous sort of study. But that gave me the the skills I needed to be able to look at an organization and say, this is an interesting direction you're going in, but how do you prove that it's interesting? Or are you getting diverted from your core business strategy? So it became strategic, it became organizational. There's so many threads to it. It's not just about fundraising, although that is a key element of it, because if you can prove how good you are at doing what you're doing, a partner, a funder, or an investor would be that much more inclined to think, that's an interesting proposition. I think I can seed some investment money into it, see how it goes, and take it from there. And so that's often where it begins. It begins perhaps in a year's funding or a year's investment, and then it grows because people begin to see not only are they good at what they do, but they're good at showing that they're good at what they do. And that is so important. Telling the right story, I think, is so key. So from a storyteller as an actor and a playwright and various other things, I try my hand at so many things, including fractional work. From telling stories in that way, I now tell stories to help organizations prove their effectiveness and prove that they're worth partnering with and investing in.
So you started telling this story really around some one-off projects, I suppose. But what drew you into trying to move this into more of a fractional approach? And what advantages, if any, have you had from trying to go down that route?
The thing that really got me interested in pursuing it as a route was just the fact that there was an awful lot of projects that started to arise at the same time that I was able to work on, that I was able to help evaluate. And one of the things I learned doing my studies was evaluations aren't necessarily giving people what they want to hear, because sometimes things don't work. And it's important that organizations realize that sometimes they take their work in the wrong direction and they can realign. And sometimes evaluation helps them to do that. This particular project wasn't core to what we thought it was. We ended up putting a lot of time and resources into it. So I noticed that people were doing things that may not have made their organization so efficient. So it was kind of serendipitous because it coincided with a lot of work that came. I didn't expect it to come. I was made redundant, and I knew it was coming. And I thought I'd go for a normal career. I'll carry on being a normal person, getting normal work. And I applied for 99 jobs, got none of them. At the same time, people were saying, why don't you write this piece for us? Because we're really concerned that, we would like to tell the funder how wonderful we are. And I was, okay, I'll do that. And I cleared that piece of work. And then another piece came and then another piece. And I thought, well, there's a pattern emerging here. So I've had lots of bits of work in that sphere, which have enabled me to sort of draw on. Does that answer your question?
Well, I suppose the thing that I'm always grappling with is what makes your work style successful for you when you're having longer term fractional leadership roles rather than just a series of one-off projects. And that's the question I was really trying to explore.
Right. So, it's variety of work. You get the opportunity to meet some wonderful people and go to interesting parts of the country. So one of my pieces of work is in Weymouth, which is lovely. And I always go in the summer if I can, for obvious reasons. You get to stay in some dodgy hotels. I think it's the variety that it affords really does inspire. So you might be working with an organization that is dedicated to homelessness. And so a lot of my work is with charities. An organization working with homelessness and working with the homeless in their city and evaluating the effectiveness not only of the work that they do, but the work that their city does in helping to tackle the issue of homelessness. Or looking at people whose lives are in abject poverty and how they can lift out of those things. So I enjoy the sort of variety. I enjoy meeting new people. I enjoy the travel. I enjoy the shaping of a story. At the same time as I started working, in fact, it was when I was doing my PhD, I started working with a piece of software which helped me to not only evaluate what people were saying in a focus group or interview and draw out themes from that, which was core to my PhD as well, but also a piece of software that had me write documents in segments, which I can then export to Microsoft Word. And that's a very techie thing, but it appealed to my techie side, which the PhD did as well. A lot of PhD students struggled alongside me because they were doing things in an analog way, and I particularly enjoyed the technical side of it. So that aspect appeals to me as well. So you've got meeting people, you've got helping to shape stories, tell stories, and the techie side. Does that answer the question?
That's great, David.
I'm wondering, David, if you could, before we go on any further and hear your fascinating story and perspective, I'm conscious that for some of our listeners, they may not be very familiar with what impact evaluation is. So I'm wondering, could you explain it more succinctly in compelling terms so that somebody who is coming to this for the first time has a better sense of what that actually means?
Mm. Okay. As an organization, what's the change that you expect to see in individuals, in families, in community groups, in the locality, in your neighborhood? What is the change and how do you measure that change? And is that actually what your partners are looking for, what your stakeholders are looking for as well? And how do you clearly explain that change? That's basically it. How do you justify the existence of your organization? You can do it through all sorts of persuasive means, but unless you can show the evidence of the change that you're affecting, it's hot air, I guess. So there are various ways you can do that. Do you want me to go on?
Well,
Well, no, I think that helps people better understand
Mm.
what it is you do and the value that you bring. Because for those who have never engaged in impact evaluation, they probably haven't, because it doesn't give much clue really in terms of outside of context what that actually means.
Yes, it can be a bit abstract to some people, and I get that.
Yeah.
I suppose I'm reminded, you talked a little bit about homelessness, and I remember sitting down with now Lord John Bird, the founder of The Big Issue,
Mm.
and his big thing was most homelessness charities don't remove the problem of homelessness. All they do is help the people who are serving in the charities have a living, or feel they're doing something good, or feel they're helping out in some way. But actually, most homelessness charities, in his view,
Mm.
are just perpetuating the homelessness industry and not ending homelessness. And what was interesting, I mean, he was saying this 10, 15 years ago. What was interesting was that during COVID, magically, the government took almost every homeless person off the street pretty much overnight,
Mhm.
and there were no homeless people.
I remember that happening. I remember that happening to someone I knew, a homeless chap locally, who was rehoused into a hotel. He loved it. Never been in anything quite like it. He was just over the moon. And they rehoused him in a flat later on, and then he carried on living homelessness because he couldn't cope with the responsibility of having a flat, also the bills, and also he knew his patch. He knew where he lived, which was in the park. So it's an interesting one, and that's a good point you raised because you're starting to touch upon the whole upstreaming thing. It's great if an organization can deal with a problem and show how good it is, but at what point you start looking at the causes of that problem and dealing with those? And I think that is a really key element. And actually, part of my work is focused on that. You're doing this fantastic work. We're now showing people how you're doing it. You've matured as an organization. I could talk more about the maturity side later.
Mm.
But part of being a mature organization is dealing with the root cause of the thing you're dealing with. And sociologically, it's fascinating to see how and why certain people groups become deprived or isolated or homeless or whatever it may be. And it's societal factors, it's mental health factors. There's so many things feeding into that. And it's about finding out those as well, reporting on those and telling the government, listen, guys, you've got to wake up to this. I was very fortunate to be able to speak to the House of Lords about what is community. And they were very keen to listen. There was a lot of people there. But the difficulty is when dealing with politicians is often they want to be seen to be dealing with it, but not actually dealing with it, if that makes sense. So it's very difficult to avoid the posturing rather than getting down to the actual work.
So could you expand on that and then identify for, particularly from a listener point of view, who is looking at that? And don't forget, some of our listeners are also buyers of the kind of expertise you're bringing to the table, David. So what are some of the, if you were summing them up succinctly, what are some of the key challenges that you face? Because you've touched on things from a number of different fronts. So if you were looking at this both as a fractional executive, but also from a buyer point of view, what are those challenges?
One of the major challenges is understanding the importance of doing this. And I suppose there is a pain point for most people whereby, certainly in the charitable sector where I predominantly work, whereby they need funding, otherwise they don't survive. And part of the importance of that is enabling them to build relationships with their funders so that they can regularly report back how well they're doing or what the challenges are, because sometimes funders are happy to hear the challenges and will continue to fund on that basis. One particular organization I work with regularly report back through me. They report their financial side through the financial people, but they report back through me about the quantitative and the qualitative impact that they're having on their community, and that enabled them to be refunded. So they were funded for 5 years. They got refunded for 5 years, which was unheard of because they enjoyed that relationship. Partly it was the relationship, and then it was the report that I was writing. But they really appreciated the fact that we could sit and talk about all the issues that they were raising through helping people eliminate debt in their lives, but also the relationship that enabled them to talk about what can we do more effectively to upstream that side of things. So the difficulty is in finding people who recognize the importance of this. Also, for senior management, I think it's critical for strategy because sometimes an evaluation can show them that actually they're putting work in the wrong place or they're putting work in the right place, but in other wrong places. And they need to streamline what they're doing and save costs in that area as well so that they can focus on the one thing that they do and do it well. And sometimes an evaluation can help them do that. So in every report I write, I put down recommendations. I might call it something else. Sometimes I'd say it's a summary, or it may be thoughts. I sometimes call it thoughts because I don't want to come across as someone who prescribes necessarily what they should do. But they will look at those and say, I recognize there are some challenges here we need to deal with. Otherwise, we're going to have mission creep, which is a common thing for any organization, but particularly charities who are run by people who are passionate about serving their community and end up serving in too many areas rather than the one area that they can do very well. So finding that, being able to communicate that effectively to people, ironically, being a communicator myself, it's sometimes a big challenge to be able to communicate the importance of impact evaluation, as well as the funding side and the financial side. Improving your organizational strategy, I think, is important. And one of the things I do in my capability maturity model is make sure that the message coming from the core team, the senior management team, is disseminated right down to the advisor, the volunteer advisor on the street, who can listen to the advice given to them and think, yes, I know they've got my back because we're all working for the same thing. That can sometimes get crept out if the senior management aren't on the same page as their employees or volunteers.
So that begs the question, what kind of mindset do you bring and what do you have to adopt given the diversity of what you have to engage with, what you have to deliver on, how you have to be mindful of validating what you do effectively and what the organization does. So you have a really interesting background, but that mindset that you bring to impact evaluation and to clients who are approaching this, particularly if it's their first time.
Mm. I think one of the things I do is a workshop on the theory of change, which introduces the client to the concept of what it is that I offer. And that basically is half day or a day, depending on how much time they have to spare, which actually explains the importance of what we do and also asks them the question, what it is that they actually do. So,
Out there, David, you mentioned the theory of change.
yeah,
It's a technical term. What does it actually mean in the evaluation context?
right. What's the change you expect to see in the individuals, in the families, in the community groups, in the locality, the neighborhood, the ward, the borough, the country? What is the change you want to see? And effectively, I suppose, if you write a logo for an organization with the strap line, what's the strap line of your logo? Breaking down barriers. What does that mean? You know, dealing with homelessness, one person at a time. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Dealing with debt, one person at a time. That also makes sense. So what's your strap line, and how does all the work you do feed into that? And the Theory of Change workshop sort of addresses all this and helps people to evaluate, stop and think about what they're doing and what is the actual change they want to see at the client level. And then I will gradually, if the organization's willing and able, I will gradually introduce them to the capability maturity model, which I embrace, which looks at their culture. Do they have a culture of impact measurement which affects the strategic level, the trustees, as well as the person on the ground? Do they have a strategy which mirrors their theory of change? Does the strategy go off into lots of different directions? Should it be streamlined? How does that affect the person at the ground? Do they have maturing quantitative measures? So can they quantitatively say, oh, the hand on heart, we reach this number of people, and this number of people are affected after 6 months, after 12 months, after 15 months. Where's your organization going to be in 2 years' time? And where are your clients going to be? You're maturing qualitative measures. Do you interview your clients? Do you talk to them? What's their feedback? Do you give them open questions? Do you have focus groups? How do you thematically organize that data into something that can speak to your funders, your stakeholders, your trustees, your clients themselves? Now, some people are very good, some organizations are very good at the spinning a yarn about what they do and making it look glossy, which is wonderful. But how does that affect people on the ground in reality? Then looking at statistical maturity. So do they have a statistical measure by which they can say, over a period of time, X number of clients have had this change? And I encourage them to use something called the Warwick Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale if they work with clients with mental health challenges, as most people do in the charitable sector. And you take a snapshot at the beginning, and it's all anonymized, it's just data. And then you take a snapshot at the end, coded so you know it's the same person, and you measure the change, the distance traveled by that individual in several key areas which have been approved by the Universities of Warwick and Edinburgh. And then I look at the way they narrate their stuff, how they narrate, whether they're consistent in their reporting styles and so on. So those are my maturity level sort of things. And then I break it down into smaller bite-sized chunks. And then I have a questionnaire, which I usually ask their operational manager or equivalent. How do you score against this? How do you score against that? How do you score against that? And sometimes they do quite well against some of it, but no organization is perfect. So there's always room for improvement with an organization. And it's fun to go on that journey with them.
Wow. There's a couple of threads that I suppose I wanted to pull The first thing is that
To unravel.
you've talked mainly about the charity sector. So I put a sort of commercial hat on. Some of the things you've talked about feel to me, I mean, Lorraine's the expert, feel to me the kinds of things that a brand and marketing person would have to think about. A lot of
I
communication.
was,
Yeah, there's a lot
I
of
was actually reflecting
strategy,
on that.
focus, what's the value you're creating. But the second thing is, and that's the sort of external focus stuff. But the second thing I was wondering is, there are large organizations that we see have had massive fails. We can talk about Deepwater Horizon, we can talk about Post Office, we can talk about Boeing, whatever. And then the new CEO comes in and says, I'm going to sort it all out. I'm going to do a massive change program and it'll never happen again. How do you see the skills and insights and processes that you use mainly in the charity sector? How different would it make commercial organizations if they use some of those approaches to really build lasting change within their organizations and within their client bases?
So when I worked in the city back in the day, about 1,000 years ago, I worked for Reuters, the news organization, and I had a wonderful time there. And one of the things I became very obsessed with was root cause analysis, fishbone charts, Ishikawa charts, all that kind of stuff, Pareto models. It's very niche. But had I stayed at Reuters, I left in about 2004 and worked in the charitable sector. But had I stayed there, I would have probably become far more involved in their root cause analysis. And I think with the organizational failures that you mention, I think it's about the organization being honest enough to cut everything right back to finding out what was the root cause of the problem that led to the collapse of the organization.
But that's the root cause. But when you're trying to then restore the organization to something
Okay.
else,
Yeah.
how could evaluation make people more effective in that side?
I suppose it's about communicating effectively. This is what happened. This is why it happened. So you got the root cause side of it. And then it's saying, now we know what to avoid. We know where to go from here, and to regularly review what we're doing. So implementing processes and procedures that continually enable the organization to reflect on its effectiveness in dealing with the root cause issues that caused the issue in the first place, that caused the crisis in the first place. That would be one thing. So I guess cyclical improvement, that's something that is built into all maturity models anyway. You cyclically review what you're doing to ensure that it is efficient, not only efficient, but effective, not only effective, but deals with the small things that in any organization can creep in, which then cause bigger problems down the line. And root cause analysis helps you to do that because then you see how it affected initially. And then you work towards constantly evaluating what you're doing. I would say on regular quarterly basis, probably. So you would have someone whose job it was to evaluate regularly what you're doing and whether it was effective and what needs to be pruned or what needs to be encouraged. Positive reinforcement is so critical in any organization. And I don't think we get enough of that because we're British. And it's culturally, counterproductive, counterintuitive, whatever. It goes against the grain. I'm not so sure about Ireland. I think you're probably far more
Oh, no, it's pretty much the same, to be
Uh,
honest with you.
I think
Yeah.
it's the weather. I think that's what causes this crazy, crazy thing. Because I mean, Ireland has bleak weather as we do, but I think that's it. It's about encouraging people. You're doing an incredible job in this, and I've noticed that when you're on duty, I notice we get far fewer negative customer feedback than we do when the night team is on duty. Why is that? Why do you think we can improve? What do you think the night team needs to learn that the day team need to find out? How can we cross-pollinate the good stuff that's happening? I think it's about encouraging what's working well being prepared to prune what isn't working well, but constantly evaluating. So a big organization such as Reuters, as I worked for, would be doing that rather than end of project evaluation, because the projects never ended. They carried on forever. But you would have to regularly iterate the evaluation.
So I think you partially answered this, but a question I did have for you in the context of everything you've shared is, do you think that commercial and social enterprises actually properly value the role of impact evaluation? Do they understand the depth in it, or because you've spoken about how you have to constantly iterate around this. So do you have a large education element to what you do to actually help them on this journey of valuing and understanding what it is you actually do for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think I work predominantly on a one-to-one with people, mostly.
Mm.
So I would do a workshop with an organization, and then I might take a focus group actually of staff, because one of the things you do with a group of staff, let's say a particular division within an organization, is you'd find out where the pressure points are pretty quickly, because they will tell you straight away. If they felt you were neutral enough and not invested enough in the sort of management side of things, you were an independent evaluator who came in to evaluate where the staff felt things were at. I think that's a key element to it. Um, so that's one thing I would do. Also work with individuals, because often at individual level you're working, they would have an understanding of where the organization is on a particular cycle. Um, yeah. So I mean, I would do work like that, and then the educational side, yeah, constant workshops if necessary. Workshopping the importance of a particular division and its contribution to the overall organization. One of the things that I noticed happens a lot in the city is that people work in silos, and because we're human, we just tend to go back into our silos. And cross pollination and cross communication is a key cultural phenomenon which needs to happen more, certainly in a lot of organizations. Because no matter how much you do cross pollinate and you do communicate, pretty soon people go back into their silos. So fighting against that, using workshops, using focus groups, using methods like that to ensure that people do cross pollinate where it's necessary is very important.
That makes me reflect on even say work I've done myself, David, whereby uh, you actually have almost like an active intervention whereby key people from different sections and that there's actually a brief meeting on a regular basis whereby there's a like, this is where we're at, this is what we're doing, a sharing of activities. So you're keeping your peers up to speed and it's live term and it's humanized because then you have engagement too.
And where there's senior management involved, they get to meet people. Sometimes they don't rub shoulders with at all. They may have interviewed them and then just left them to get on with their job. And
Yeah.
suddenly they realize, oh gosh, these people are really good at this or the other, or they could be better in this or part of the organization. So there's all sorts of that sort of stuff going on. I think workshopping is important to, if you can, mix up the sort of hierarchies if they exist in an organization. I mean, I personally don't like hierarchies, but they do tend to exist. So where you can fight against those, great.
The bigger the organization, the more there tends to be. Whereas when you're back to smaller organizations, there's much more fluidity across roles. And in fact, people are multitasking across different, their role description probably becomes a bit flexible out of necessity. So it's a whole different cultural phenomenon mindset to how people approach things.
Certainly the case in charity world, the charity world where everyone just does everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Capacity. Yeah. What's your perspective, Charles, considering you've worked across the large enterprise as well as the smaller too?
I suppose, I worked in big consulting and there was a stage when everything was KPIs,
Oh, yeah.
key performance indicators, and the consultants would come in and they'd start with, I don't know, cost, revenue, and then drill down. So those are the top key KPIs. and they drill down all the way through the organization so that the guy who made the tea had a KPI about how much sugar he put in the tea or whatever it was. I mean, I'm exaggerating for emphasis, but there was this whole view that as long as you create some kind of measurement for everything and drill it all down to the people, at the ground level and get them to do what was necessary, then it all magically feed all the way up and the profit and the shareholder value would increase enormously. And so I suppose that was in some ways a theory of change, in some ways a impact evaluation process upside down. But would you say that's the whole answer for bringing success, David? Having KPIs at every single level down to the person who cleans the floor?
It's an interesting one because I used a lot of KPIs in my work in the city. They have their place. If people are using a lot of KPIs, I would probably get a group together to ask them whether they thought those KPIs were relevant to the work that they were actually doing. Because sometimes we measure things that were great 2 years ago and we keep measuring them, but actually the business has moved on, but we're still measuring the old things. And sometimes the employees have a better idea as to what they should be measuring than the people who set the KPIs, who probably left and gone on to other jobs, let's face it. So I think they have a place, but they need to be regularly reviewed with the people who are actually doing the work at the front end. It may well be that they are fine, but also how did KPIs affect the culture of the place? And culture is a funny one because that's something I'm also looking into, the culture of evaluation in a workplace, but also the culture of a workplace and what people assume are the mores that drive the business, whether they actually are the ones that drive the business or is something completely different at play. And sometimes, as I mentioned before, you do get mission creep, where you get a CEO change and the new CEO has a completely different vision to the previous one, which isn't uncommon. Does that serve the organization? Does it serve the staff? Or do they find themselves going in a completely wrong direction? Or, how do these things play out? And how do you stop it becoming abstract and just something that people do because they've always done, rather than something that actually has an effect for the person who's putting the sugar in the tea? And at what point do we introduce chocolate biscuits?
I kid you not, David. I was in an organization where they decided that they were going to take out the chocolate biscuits from all of the meetings. And then they did. Then they got feedback from clients saying, "We love coming to your place because we get really good biscuits." So, as an organization priding themselves in excellence, hiding the chocolate biscuits wasn't the right answer for them.
It's funny. I worked for an organization that was based in America, AT&T, when they came to the UK for a while, and that they really knew how to party. They really knew how to cater for their staff. It was incredible. Some of the parties and the conferences they would give, they really knew how to treat us well. So yeah, I think those soft touches sometimes matters. I can understand ditching chocolate biscuits for fruit. I can understand that.
It sounds like you're overlapping into an awful lot of areas that would also be brand related. So you've got the human factors, the intangible versus the tangible, and how you measure that and how you don't throw the proverbial baby out with the bathwater. And also how you make it real and actionable, as opposed to, well, that's just a process that we do. And the worst saying that you'll often hear, well, we've always done it that way. But that doesn't mean it's necessarily the right way.
which is sometimes
redundant.
I guess why organizations change the name or change the strap line or change their logo, because they want to refresh what they always set out to do. They realize they've gone stale. And I think marketing has a key element to play in all this, really, because it tells the story to external customers, tells the story to the internal staff. Actually, we're becoming more this shape rather than that shape.
Mm.
It's some people think it's a bit woo, but actually I think it's got a really important message to tell people. We're going to look more cubist now.
So everything you're sharing, David, suggests that I know you focus much more in the charitable sector, but this would have as much relevance in private sector and commercial focus sector as it does in social or charitable work.
Yeah.
And we all need to at times stand back and look at things and go, is this relevant still? Is it delivering on a practical sense? Is there, because the world is changing so fast now, is how we look at the world relevant? And how is this trickling down through people?
It goes into the VUCA world
Mm.
stuff Charles talks about, the volatility of the world. And actually, yes, I mean, how do the money markets respond to the political changes that are happening on an hourly basis? I mean, it's quite incredible. I was quite astonished how the markets responded to the presidential election. I was really gobsmacked because suddenly the way we view things changed overnight and were turned completely around. Whatever one's political views may be, things
Mm.
are very volatile. And in that world, therefore, how does our business, whether it's a communications business, whether it's a financial business, whether it's providing shoes, to a niche market, how is that affected by the money markets changing, by
Mm.
the cost of living crisis, by the increase in stealth taxation or blatant taxation? All these things play into how we view our business and the way we work. I absolutely agree.
It's fascinating, David, that you brought in the sort of government dimension,
Mm.
and we probably don't have time to critique the extent to which government departments really hold themselves accountable for the impact they want to make. And the
Well, that's
high
that's
pledges or
actually
whatever.
getting us all looking at that very differently, Charles. Suddenly there's a level of transparency or otherwise, or questioning that the electorate has never really had before. And you described that only recently. The overall global scenario of any of us is keeping track of tectonic. You described it as a level of tectonic change, and some parts of Europe just aren't even catching up with that yet.
But
True.
this is March 2025. We can talk about the whole globe. I wanted to bring this back to a question that one of the listeners was asking us, which is, if I'm a fractional executive, if I've got a portfolio of clients, what can I use from your impact toolkit to show that client I'm delivering value month in, month out? What are the kinds of things that you would suggest that they might be engaging their clients around so that those clients can see the value for the money that they are paying for us to show up?
Depends so much on the business itself, what the end user experience is. So, I mean, a lot of it is seeing the way in which people receive feedback from the end users and listening to their stories. One of the things I've noticed is that there can be sometimes a difference between if, for example, you have a public company that has shareholders and clients. What's the experience of the clients, and how does that affect the way the shareholders feel? Or does it? Are the shareholders being served at the expense of the clients? Because I think that does happen a lot. And I can understand it because they're the shareholders of the people you meet at the AGM and you want to please them. But are the clients being profited out? Is the profit so great that the clients are losing out at the experience because the prices are too great? So how do you report back on that? How do you report back on the client experience? I've noticed so many apps that I download say, "What do you think of us?" And Amazon, "What do you think of the purchase you made?" And this is evaluation; it's impact evaluation. But I don't know how much it impacts people. They say it does. I suppose they aggregate it, and over time, I mean, I look at the star ratings on any product I buy on Amazon and say, I tend to go to the 5-star ratings, then I look at the 2-star ratings and the 1-star rating. What do they actually say about the product? So it's all these relationships you have, regularly looking at those and reporting on those. I suppose it's knowing what the important ones are and knowing which to report on regularly. Does that answer your question, or have a complaint? Because I can't actually, I can't actually remember what it was he said.
Well, I suppose those are some really important threads that come out.
Mhm.
I was thinking, I'm a fractional. I'm sending an invoice in every month that being signed off by the CEO, and I promise to do wonderful things for the business. What are the kinds of things from your toolkit that I might apply to show that I'm making a lasting difference?
Okay, it depends on what it is you do, what service you offer. Regularly feedback, regularly talk to the operating officers or whoever you connect with. It may be the CEO, probably won't be. But if it's a small organization, it may well be. Ask to gate crash their senior management meetings, give a presentation, talk about what you've done, tell them how wonderful you are. Don't be shy in coming forward. Also talk about the challenges, because everyone understands challenges, and ask them what they think they would do in the case of that particular challenge, if you have challenges. But constant communication is so vital. Um, so with one organization, I review regularly with a particular team I'm working with, because they work with the clients directly, regularly, and they're constantly changing the way they work. But then I work with the operating officer once every 6 months just to make sure they're on board with what I'm doing. They know what work I'm doing with the client facing team and so on. And then the chief exec once a year, who nods and comes in. But whenever I go up there, he likes to pop in and see me anyway, because he just wants to catch up. We're old friends. So it's about building those relationships and maintaining the constant flow of communication, and constantly asking, is this enough? Do you want more? Do you want less? Am I annoying you? That kind of stuff. But constantly keep the communication channels open. I think that's very important, because if you're getting paid on a retainer, that is critical. Just so that they know that they're getting value for money for the regular amount they pay. If they pay on invoice on a particular piece of work, but make sure that piece of work is on time, is well presented, and gives a certain indication of other work that you might do that could benefit them as well.
Our time is beginning to draw to a close, but I'm sure there's a couple of other things that Lorraine would like to
Well, a
comment on.
question that comes to mind is, how do you actually see the role of impact evaluation changing in the coming years? When you look at the pace of change, geopolitical, AI, all of those factors coming into the mix, um, the way we're so much more interconnected.
That's a really good question. I think the basic disciplines probably won't change a great deal. How they are obtained, how the results are obtained may change, because technology has totally turned everything on its head, much to my delight, because I love technology and I'm using new tech. I love AI, actually. I think it's fascinating, and it can be a bit misleading at times. You can go down rabbit holes if you're not careful.
Mm.
But I think the basic concepts will always remain with us. What is the change that is happening? is it relevant to my theory of change, what I wanted to do, the impact I wanted to make, and how do I prove that effectively? It may be that we prove it by projecting holograms into the ether, or we communicate via, I don't know, via various sort of fancy satellite links from the top of our mountain layer in, where we're living because of climate change or whatever it may be. I mean, who knows? I think the basic philosophies underpinning all this will really remain the same. I think. Who knows?
Well, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us, David. It's fascinating, particularly the diverse range of your background and where you've come from. I think there's an awful lot for us to learn from what you've shared with us. So, can you share with our listeners where they can find you and learn more about your work as a fractional executive?
Certainly. Well, I'm on LinkedIn, basically. David H. Simmons, I think I am on LinkedIn. Um, Let me just double check on that. But yeah, they're welcome to connect with me, to follow me. So I come up with the occasional article and blog from time to time. And by all means, engage and disagree.
Yeah.
If you've heard something, I don't know if I agree, or I've got another question, or by all means, do come back to me.
Well, we'll share that in the show notes so that people can find you.
And you said you've done a podcast yourself, David. Remind
Yeah,
me
of course.
called and how they might find it.
It's called The Power of Impact: Stories of a Better Future. And they can hear all about it from my LinkedIn profile. I think I point to it there. I'm sure I do. And also, I'm happy to share all my reports and evaluations with people. I put them all on ResearchGate, which is a research-based website. I have a profile on there. It includes my PhD thesis and loads of other reports and research reports I've written, as well as the odd evaluations. So,
We'll
yeah,
get all that from you for the show notes, and then they
yes,
can dig in and find out more and read in depth and reach out to you.
yep, please do.
Well, that's it for today's episode of the Fractional Frontier. We hope you found the conversation insightful.
And be sure to follow us on LinkedIn for more exclusive content and catch the edited episode on all major platforms. And don't forget to subscribe. And if you enjoyed today's discussion, leave us a review or share the episode with your network. And thanks for exploring the fractional frontier with us, where
Where
leadership knows
leadership
no
knows no
boundaries.